If you would like to record audio in the same way that you can see me doing right here in Studio One, then you've come to the right place. Hi folks, I'm Mike, and I hope you're well. Just a quick word of encouragement, because I don't want you to be put off by the length of this video. It's actually really quick and easy to record audio in Studio One, but the first time you do it, there's a little bit of setup involved, and you may encounter some problems which I've addressed in this video. So don't worry, it's not difficult, it's actually a breeze, but I do encourage you to work through the whole video so that you don't miss any important information. Let's dive in. So I'm going to assume at this point that you have an audio interface connected to your system and either a microphone or some kind of instrument plugged into that audio interface, and that it's all working. Unfortunately, I can't give you a tutorial on how to set that up on your system because it's different with every single piece of hardware. But once we start Studio One, we still need to let it know that it should use that piece of hardware. Now, the first time you use it, it may by default be using the built-in audio system. I'm on Windows at the moment, and you can see at the bottom it's using Windows audio. If you're on Mac, it'll be using the internal Mac audio. So we need to make sure that it shows your audio interface there, and to do that we're just going to click on the name of the interface it's using at the moment, or the audio system, and that's going to bring up this dialog box here. And you can see there's a drop down right at the top here next to where it says audio device. You need to click on that, and you can see with mine there's quite a number of devices to choose from. That's because I've got a number of devices or I've had them connected, but for you it may be just one or two. So just go ahead and make sure you select the one that you want to use. In my case, it's going to be the Antelope Audio Thunderbolt, so I'm just going to click on that and then click on OK. The next thing we need to do is create a new song. So I'm going to go to the top left here in Studio One, click on New, and it opens up a dialog box that looks something like this. Now, I'm on version 6. Earlier versions looked a little bit different, but the main thing you want to focus on the left hand side is make sure you are creating a song and not a project. Projects are something quite different in Studio One. Then on the right hand side, we're going to give it a name, so I will call mine Test, and then we want to select a sample rate. Now, if you're just starting out, I would recommend choosing either 44.1 kilohertz or 48. I'm going to go with 48, so I'll select that, and then we click on OK, and it's going to create that new song. Now, importantly, it hasn't really saved anything quite yet. So if you want to make sure that this song is going to be saved, go up to File and then just go down to Save As and give it a name. It's already called Test there, and I'll just click on Save just to make sure everything is permanently saved. The next thing I'm going to do is actually create an audio track. Now, there's a number of different ways of doing this in Studio One. I'm just going to show you a very simple way, and that is to right click on the grey panel on the left hand side here. And when I do that, you can see there's a couple of different options for adding audio tracks. I can either add a mono one or a stereo one. Now, I'm using just one single microphone today, so I'm going to choose to add an audio track mono. When I do that, it creates the audio track. Now, I like to rename my tracks as soon as they're created, and to do that, you just double click on the current track name up there, and then you can type in your new name. Mine is going to be called Vox. I'll hit enter, and that's done. The next thing I want to do is make sure that this new audio track is using the correct input from my audio interface. You can see which one it's currently using here, where it says input L. That stands for input left. Now, if I click on this, you can see I've actually got two available inputs, input L and input R, and they relate to the first and second inputs of my audio interface. But it just so happens that my microphone is connected to input 3 on my audio interface, so I need to make sure that's available to Studio One. And to do that, I'm going to click on Audio I/O Setup. When I do that, it opens up this dialog box. You can see my audio interface here, and you can see its inputs from 1 through to 32. Yours may have a different number of inputs, so yours is going to look a little bit different in that case. You can also see that inputs 1 and 2 are already occupied in some way, and I want to use input 3. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Add Mono at the bottom left here, and when I do that, it creates a new mono track, and it's automatically used input 3 because that was just the next one one available. If you need to change that to another input, then you can just go ahead and click on one of these boxes here to do that. The next thing I'm going to do is rename it. So I'm just going to double click on its name and I'm going to call this one Mic. Okay. Now, before I go ahead and click on OK, I like to actually click on Apply first. After I do that, it takes a moment or two, but you can see now that there's a little meter moving for this new input as I speak. So that just confirms to me that I've made the correct choice. Then I can go ahead and click on OK. Now, once I've done that, I need to actually select it for this new track. So I'm going to go up here again and then click on Input L. And now I can see that I've got this third choice available here called Mic. So I'll click on that and that makes sure I'm using the correct input. Now, the next thing I need to do is make sure that my track is armed for recording, meaning that when I hit the record button in a moment, it'll actually record on that track. So to do that, we're going to click on the record button just here on the track. Now, before I do that, I just want to warn you that you'll see that button get highlighted and it will be enabled, but you'll also see this button next to it become enabled. This is the monitor button. We'll find out what that's for in a moment. But the reason why both of them become enabled when I click on the record button is because of a current setting I've got in Studio One. You can see the little spanner icon here. If I click on that and then go down to the bottom here, you can see I have monitoring follows record selected. So if you didn't want that to happen for future reference, you can just switch it off here. I like to have it switched on, so I'm going to go ahead and click on this record button. But before I do, I just want you to be aware that there's going to be a change in sound. Let's do it now. Okay, so I've pressed both of the buttons. And you can hear that weird delay sound, yeah? Let me switch it off again because that's kind of annoying. Now, the reason you can hear two sounds, or my original voice and then my voice delayed, is because you're hearing the sound of my voice directly from my microphone, and you're also hearing the sound of my voice after it's been processed by the computer, and that takes some time. So there's a delay, and that delay is called latency. Now, when you're trying to record something accurately with accurate timing, that can become very, very off-putting. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of different ways that you can fix that. But you may ask me, Mike, why would you even want to have that monitoring switched on, which causes that delay? Well, it may be that you want to actually hear your voice with something like, say, some reverb on it while you're recording, and you want to add a reverb plugin. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But the point is that in order to do that, we're going to have to hear the sound from the computer, because the reverb is going to be on the computer in Studio One. So that's why you'd want to have that monitoring enabled. If you're pretty sure you can record without any sort of nice comfort reverb on your voice or anything, then you can just go ahead and switch that monitoring off, and you can just go ahead and record your voice dry and add reverb later in the mix. Now, before I talk about reverb and things, let me tell you a way that you can approach fixing this dreadful latency delay. So we're going to start off by adjusting the buffer size. If you're on PC, press Control, comma, or if you're on Mac, do Command, comma, and that brings up options. Just make sure the audio setup is selected at the top here and the audio device is selected on these two tabs here. Now, there's some numbers that we're interested in here. The first one is device block size. At the moment, mine's set to 768 samples. And then the other two numbers we're interested in are the input latency and output latency. We can see that combined together, they add up to around about 32 milliseconds at the moment. That's way too long. I like to get it below 10 and ideally below 7, to be honest with you. So in order to make that number lower, we need to adjust the device block size. Now, with some audio interfaces, you're going to be able to select a different block size directly from where it shows this number here. But on others, you need to click on Control Panel, and that's what I have to do on mine. So I'm going to click on Control Panel, and it brings up this audio interface control panel here. It's going to look different depending on your audio interface. But I want to change the buffer size, so I'm going to change it from 768 here, and let's select something like 128 to begin with. Okay, so I'll select 128 and click on apply, and that will now go ahead and change the numbers there. If you look now where it says input latency, it's 2.6, and then output latency is 2.7. So it's somewhere around, it's just sort of over 5 milliseconds now. That isn't going to be much better. I'll just close that panel there, click on OK down here, and then I'm just going to switch on my recording button again so that we're going to hear the latency. So let's try that out. And it's much less, isn't it? You can hear it, but that would be workable, okay? I could probably get along with that. If I wanted to make it smaller, I could. So control, comma again, and I'll just go ahead and change that to even, let's try 64. I'll click on apply, see what happens. Yeah, it's got much lower again now. So that is my first port of call. I'll talk about some problems you may have with this approach a little bit later, but first of all, let's just try adding an effect. There's a number of different ways of adding effects to track in Studio One. I'm just going to show you a super simple one today, just for demonstration purposes. You'll notice I have my browse panel open on the right hand side. If you can't see yours, just click on the browse button at the bottom right, and that toggles that panel off and on. Also make sure you have the effects tab selected right at the top. Now you're going to see a number of different folders probably within that panel, depending on which plugins you've got installed on your system. But what we should all have installed are the Presonus plugins. So you'll want to open, if you want to follow along with me, the Presonus folder here. Now once you've opened that, I'm going to go ahead and select the Room Reverb plugin. Okay, so that's this one here. I'm just going to grab it, and I'm just going to drag it across and drop it onto our new track. It automatically opens the plugin here. Now I can't hear anything at the moment because I had actually switched off the monitoring button. So I'll go up to the top and click on the monitoring button to switch it on, and now we can hear the reverb as well as my voice without the reverb. They're sort of blended together. Now you can correct that blend using the mix knob here, okay, on this particular plugin. So I'll just turn that down a little bit. I'm just going to make it a sort of a smaller sounding room by changing the length control here, okay? And that's the sort of setting you'll often want to use just to give yourself a little bit of reverb while you're recording something like a vocal. Now, although everything may seem fine at the moment, at the end of the day, we've just got one audio track with one effect. You will probably find as you have more and more tracks in your project, especially if you've got virtual instruments and many effects, that latency is actually going to get worse and worse, and you may have to adjust that setting lower. The problem with adjusting that setting lower is your system will become more and more unstable. You may start to get pops and clicks in the sound. You may even find that suddenly Studio One stops recording. You don't want any of that. So we're going to use our second line of defense against latency, and that's to use Studio One's low latency monitoring. So let's start off by pressing Control comma or Command comma if you're on Mac, and that will open up our options again. And also make sure you have audio setup selected at the top, and then the audio device tab selected here. Now mine, if you remember, got set to 64 samples, which gave me a nice low latency, but may make my system unstable. So I'm going to start off actually by increasing that. So I'll go to my control panel. I'm going to increase it to something, say, like, I don't know, 512, a pretty safe sort of setting. I'll click on apply, and you can right away see that my round trip latency, which is input and output combined together, is about 20 milliseconds. So that would be no good if we used that. But now we're going to go to the processing tab. Now, if we click on that, you'll see at the top there's something called dropout protection, and there's a number of different selections in there from off all the way up to maximum. Now the behavior here, or the settings that you end up with, is going to change depending on your particular system and audio interface. I'm going to select, say, medium here to see what happens. Down at the bottom here where it says low latency, nothing is happening, okay? So I'm just going to go a bit further. Let's go for high, and you can see right away that this green Z has appeared there. So once you get a setting where that green Z appears, go ahead and click on OK. Now, if I turn monitoring on at the moment, let's have a listen. Okay, so we can hear a pretty definite latency. You may think, well, that didn't help at all, did it, Mike? Well, there's one thing more that we have to change. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and just turn that off. I'm going to go ahead and click on the mix button at the bottom right here. That opens up my mixer, and then all the way over on my master output, you can see below the fader there's a little Z symbol there. Okay, it's sort of grayed out at the moment. I'm going to click on that so that it turns green. I'm going to go ahead and switch monitoring on for my input again, and now you can hear that there's barely any noticeable latency at all. Now, not only have we got very, very low latency, but with the settings that I chose there, you're going to find there's much, much more stability on the system. Okay, so it's actually, you're actually going to find that you can have a number of tracks and things, and it's going to perform pretty well. So finally, after all of that, we've got our track armed for recording, we've got monitoring switched on, and now we're ready to actually start recording. So at the bottom in the middle, we have our transport controls. I hope most of these are fairly obvious to you. We've got stop here, we've got play, and then the big round one is the record button. So to start recording, I'm just going to click on that, and you can see my voice appearing in the waveform at the top there in green. And if I want to stop recording, well, my favorite way to do it is to press space on the keyboard, and that stops. Okay, now for some basic playback and editing. You can press space on your keyboard to stop start playback, and you can see my voice appearing in the wave. And you can also do some basic edits, doing things like grabbing the ends and dragging them. Okay, this is non-destructive editing, so you can see if I drag back, the recording's actually still there. You can do that to the other end as well. You can drag from the middle and move the whole thing around. If you go at the top and select the split tool, you can sort of split it like so. Okay, then go back to your normal tool. You can separate them, move them around. Those are the basic editing options that you have available. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about audio editing in much more detail than I gave you just then I highly recommend you watch this video right here. In fact, you might want to watch it right away. Now, if you've enjoyed my teaching style, I'd love it if you could hit the like button to let me know, and also subscribe if you'd like to see more of my videos. And I'll see you in the next video.